Hey, what's going on, Guardians? My name is the Black Link, and just like what was promised last week, this week we got to hear from none other than Luke Smith himself about the state of the game for Destiny 2, as well as a bit of inside information about how things are going to be changing moving forward. Earlier today, he put up this massive article, Director's Cut Part 1. Where he goes in depth into the psychology behind a lot of the decisions they've made for their content basically since Forsaken has come out. They talk about how some of the things have changed from Destiny 2 Year 1, even how it's changed from Destiny 1, and how it's going to be changing even further into the future. Now, this is, of course, part 1 of 2. The next one I do believe is coming out tomorrow or in the coming days, and it's going to focus very heavily on Shadowkeep. But this one is talking a lot about the state of the game as it is right now. And while there's not too many crazy hidden secrets that are tossed in here, there is a lot of really interesting introspective. So we're going to be giving you a summary of some of the coolest things that Luke Smith kind of revealed today. There actually are quite a few newsworthy things to talk about. So let's jump on into it. The first thing really talked about in this article is kind of a summary of the last 6 months of the game. So talking about stuff like Black Armory, the Season of the Drifter especially, and a lot of the lessons that Bungie has learned from these previous content releases. In particular, that the annual pass content release schedule that we've been experiencing since Forsaken came out is probably not going to be the way things are moving forward. There's going to be some major changes coming to that because, as the article puts it, that content release schedule just isn't healthy for the developers, and that really doesn't surprise me at all. Luke goes on to talk about the calendar of content that Bungie promised and meeting those expectations and putting that amount of content out within a set time frame was ultimately achieved by Bungie, but it wasn't the easiest thing for them to do. He talks a bit about the toll it takes on the developers, and how ultimately the rush to produce this content every couple of months and push out these not major but kind of minor releases like Black Armory, like the Season of the Drifter with Gambit Prime and all that kind of stuff, and ultimately the Season of Opulence was starting to wear people at Bungie down. And honestly, that doesn't really surprise me since it's very similar to the kind of content release schedule that they said was unsustainable back in Destiny 1. Remember, the original content release schedule for Destiny was to have a major release like D1 come out, and then have 2 minor DLCs, The Dark Below, The House of Wolves, before a year later having another major expansion. That was supposed to be the content release schedule, and even back then, they knew they couldn't keep that up. It's why we had The Taken King come out, and then we waited a year before Rise of Iron, so it really kind of surprised me that they sort of went back to that release schedule with Destiny 2, and even with Forsaken. But again, here it looks like with all of the new systems and changes that they made between Forsaken and Black Armory and all these other annual pass releases, it's just not going to be a sustainable sort of content creation schedule. So they're probably going to be dialing that back moving on into the future. And hey, I have no problem with that. As long as it means we're going to be getting more quality content and our devs aren't going to be killing themselves to push it out, I think that's overall going to be a win. Luke says that they're going to be looking to tackle this problem in Destiny 2 Year 3, so I'm very interested in hearing what they have to say about the content release schedule. After that, Luke talks a bit about powerful sources, and basically how there's almost too many things to do for powerful Engrams in the game right now. You know, you've got all your different challenges, all your different weekly playlists. He talks about having to go back to the Dreaming City all the time, and basically that they're going to be looking at the way powerful sources are kind of dished out in the future and maybe tamping back down on that. What I really understand from this is that they're going to be looking to maybe dial things back to being a little bit closer to how it was in Destiny 1, where you could get legendary engrams from all kinds of activities, but there were only a few places where you could get that stuff that would push you to in-game level. We're talking like the raids, Nightfalls, PvP, Trials of Osiris. You could get legendary engrams and get up to almost in-game level by playing whatever you wanted, but if you wanted to hit that absolute maximum light, you had to do some kind of in-game activity, whether it be PvP or PvE. And we saw that kind of change in Destiny 2, and they talk about here they want to do a better job at shifting powerful sources so that people aren't just running back to the Dreaming City every single week to play the same bits of content they've been playing since Forsaken came out. So that's personally how I read that particular statement. I get the feeling we're probably going to be pushing back to the way things are in kind of other MMOs and even back in Destiny 1, where you want that in-game light, you're going to have to do some kind of in-game activity. That or shifting the sources of powerful engrams to kind of the new seasonal in-game content. Very interesting stuff. After that, Luke Smith goes on a bit of a tear about the Season of the Drifter. He talks about a lot of different things. One really big bit of news here is that we're going to have a face-off between Gambit and Gambit Prime. There can be only one. And moving forward, they're going to be having discussions and conversations, hopefully with the community as well, about which game mode they want to keep, because one of them is going to be going away. They feel like they don't need to have Gambit and Gambit Prime. They're basically going to be looking at refining and evolving the Gambit ecosystem. And they'll be having further conversations about which game mode they personally want to keep. They talk a bit about Gambit Prime here, saying how it's a faster overall game mode, but they don't like the fact that you basically have to have a complete set of armor that takes a lot of work in another activity, the Reckoning, we'll be talking about in just a second, in order to fit into your role. So it's going to be interesting to see how they kind of refine this moving forward. But the big news there, of course, is that they're going to be tapping down on one of the Gambit modes, either normal Gambit or Gambit Prime. Which one would you rather see stay in the game? Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below. But, of course, alongside Gambit and Gambit Prime, we have some words about Reckoning. This was really interesting. I would encourage you guys to go and read this full article, by the way. Link will be in the description box below. Luke Smith comes in and talks a bit about the Reckoning game mode. He gives a little bit of insight into how they created the game mode, how they designed it around specific supers like the Well of Radiance with Phoenix Protocol, and ultimately about a lot of the shortcomings for that game mode, how frustrating it can be now that some of those supers and super regenerating exotics have been nerfed, how they basically had to break some of their own rules of game design with spawning enemies and throwing challenges all over the place just so that they could ramp up the difficulty in that encounter. It's a really interesting read. I would definitely recommend going through it. But ultimately, this section was just about the creation of Reckoning and the ideas behind its implementation, the mistakes they made with it, and how exactly they can improve upon it by implementing things from other releases like Black Armory with the Forges and, of course, the Season of Opulence with the Menagerie and the Chalice. And as an addendum to that, in the next section, Luke talks about some of the sandbox decisions that they made, stuff like nerfing the Whisper of the Worm, nerfing a lot of those super regenerating exotics and stuff like that, and how exactly they come to some of those decisions. If you want the short argument, basically Destiny of course straddles the line between an action game, a first-person shooter, and that of an RPG, and for the last year, really since Forsaken came out, the power of our player characters has been ramping up significantly. And sometimes that power trivializes the content that they're able to make in their current sandbox. They have to make changes around player power, but also tune in some stuff that are outliers like the Whisper was. But at the end of this section, we do get a little bit of a hint at some changes that might be coming in Shadowkeep. In particular, buffs to things like scout rifles and nerfs to mechanics that circumvent the ammo economy, as well as refactoring the way damage stacking rules work. That is going to be stuff like the Melting Point, the Hammer Strike from you Solar Titans, and of course Tractor Cannon and stuff like that. Hopefully those nerfs aren't too bad. Moving on from there, we get a few words about the quest log, the Pursuits tab, which is something that a lot of Guardians have had a lot of opinions about. Basically, Bungie knows the Pursuits tab is a little bit messy right now, and they're going to be looking at completely revamping that when Shadowkeep comes out. They're going to be separating quests and exotic quests away from bounties, so hopefully you'll have an easier time figuring that whole system out. This is definitely something good. The Pursuits tab has been a little bit of a mess since they revamped it a few updates ago, and anything to make it a clearer, more easy to follow picture is definitely okay in my book. But speaking of pretty pictures, after that, Luke talks a bit about the Eververse and some really interesting stuff comes out. Essentially, he talks about Bungie's philosophy when it comes to Eververse, that the kinds of things that they want to put in the Eververse store are, of course, those big glamour items. The cosmetic stuff like the exotic ornaments, Universal Titan ornaments, special stuff like the goofy-looking ghost shells and whatnot we have right now, that aren't really tied to any activity or anything in the game. Additionally, they're also looking at moving the Eververse store to the Director so that you don't have to load into the tower to go and talk to Tesh. You'll just be able to bring it up whenever you're out in orbit, which is definitely a nice change, but we also got this really interesting bit of information about how exactly these microtransactions help to fund the live development of Destiny 2. Luke goes on to state that while, of course, the Eververse store purchases, those microtransactions don't completely pay for everything like Shadowkeep and Destiny 2's upkeep, they do provide an important source of revenue for certain things, and that in particular, sales of the Whisper of the Worm's ornaments in the Eververse store were actually successful enough that they paid for, dev-wise, the 0-hour missions and rewards to be constructed. Basically, if you like the 0-hour mission, if you enjoy having the Outbreak perfected in Destiny 2, that was apparently paid for by sales of the Whisper of the Worm's ornaments, showing that these things do actually matter. It does have an effect on the game, which is cool. I never would have actually made that sort of connection there. And I'm glad that these microtransactions are actually having a tangible effect on the development of Destiny 2. Like I've said before, I no longer really have much of a problem with the Eververse store. It's virtually all cosmetic. And with Bungie using those proceeds to build new stuff in-game, I'm 100% on board with that sort of thing. But moving on, he talks a bit about how Eververse is going to be changing in the future. Basically, in the future, when you have a certain number of pieces of armor from an Eververse set, we'll say the Optimacy set like they use as an example here, if you've got 3 out of 5 pieces for that, then the cost to finish that set in silver is going to be reduced by a set percentage. In this example, 60%. So the more of an armor set you already have, the less expensive that armor is going to be in the Eververse store, which is a nice overall change. And finally in this section, we learn a bit more about the finisher abilities we'll be getting when Shadowkeep goes live. Apparently, there are going to be mods that can be socketed into equipment. And I expect to learn much more about that in Bungie's Armor 2.0 livestream to be held tomorrow, August 14th, 2019. Anyways, moving on from there, Luke Smith spent a bit of time talking about how he loves Escalation Protocol, how it was a great overall game mode for Bungie, and how the Menagerie is kind of a natural evolution upon that, with both its activity, with the bosses and the mechanics there, and of course with the reward system allowing you to shoot for what you want, and that they want to be expanding upon that in the future. Very good news here. Menagerie, I've said multiple times, is, I think, the best bit of non-raid PvE content in Destiny 2 right now. It's so much fun to play, and with its streamlined reward system allowing players to pick and choose what they want to go for, that's what I want to see more of in Destiny 2's future, and it looks like that's going to be the case moving forward. But alright, that's pretty much it for the biggest sections and biggest bits of news to come from this article. Luke Smith ends it up by talking about what's going to be coming in the next part of this, part 2 of this director's cut at the state of the game for Destiny 2. He says they're going to be looking into supers and PvP in D2, armor, stats, mods, and trade-offs, powerful sources for gear, prime engrams, and the world, damage numbers, damage stacking rules, and much more. In particular, I hope we finally get an answer about hand cannon Bloom on console and with controllers on PC, and how exactly they're going to be changing the power grind moving forward. I'm really interested in hearing more about that. Oh, and additionally, earlier in the video, I forgot to mention, we're going to be getting a hotkey for the Pursuits tab, so you can just press that and immediately jump to Pursuits on PC. Very nice little quality of life change. But there we go, Guardians. That is your summary of part 1 of Luke Smith's director cut for Destiny 2. Like I said, this is just a quick summary of some of the biggest bits of information. This article's fantastic. It gives a lot of insight into the behind-the-scenes goings-on at Bungie. I would definitely recommend that you go through and read the article in its entirety. I mean, they're absolute gems. Luke Smith tells us that they have basically a cheese-hunting team, an internal team they call Velveeta, that they put through all of their encounters to, make them as cheese-proof as possible. That's fantastic. So you should definitely go and check out the rest of what he has to say. But alright, Guardians, that is it for this video. Those are some of the biggest changes talked about in this article, and those are my thoughts. Be sure to leave me yours down in the comment section below. Don't forget, tomorrow, August 14th, Bungie is going live. They're going to be talking about Armor 2.0 and how our Guardians will be changing the way they dress moving forward in Shadowkeep. Make sure you're staying tuned to the channel where we will be covering all the biggest bits of news that we learned from that. But that's going to be it for this one, Guardians. Thank you all so much for watching. And as always, I am the Black Link. You Guardians, stay frosty.